Now, many times people like to use the one use for this graph. This graph in general is hard to use, and it's hard to use for precisely the reason I just described, is that whenever something happens, both of these curves are going to move around, and that's going to make it hard to use. But it is really nice for studying one aspect, and that's what economists, again, back to what we talked about related to consumer theory, is a notion of the short run versus the long run. And in the production context, a common view of short run versus long run is K is fixed in the short run, K is variable in the long run. And this kind of grew up in a world where we think of workers as kind of this really, kind of mass of people out there. And they're pretty undifferentiated. If you want more workers, you just go bring them in the door. Just have more workers. The ones you have work more, hire more if you need them, let them go if you don't need them. And capital was this thing that actually required investment. You actually had to create some more capital and buy more capital, and that took some time. I think that distinction of labor's like this really fungible factor and capital's this really hard to move factor is getting less and less useful over time. There are many industries today where you'd actually reverse those two roles. If I'm trying to grow, let's say I'm a law firm trying to get bigger. If I'm a law firm trying to get bigger, getting more office space and more computers and all the capital inputs is not my worry. My worry is finding attorneys that'll fit into my model and getting them integrated into the teams I have. That's a much bigger issue. Probably same is true for computer software companies and financial trading firms. There's just tons of people out there where the role of capital and labor is not what it used to be, but also might even be closer to being flipped around. That is, the world might be turned around where, in fact, you might think of the capital side in many industries much more flexible, could be moved much quicker than the labor side. That the labor side is really the part that really requires some investment. But nonetheless, I want to go through this because it illustrates a very general phenomena that is true even if we flip the roles. It'll just be true reversed. All right. So let's think about the short run. Well, in the short run, what would happen if the wage rate went down? The wage rate fell. What would happen in the short run holding K fixed? Well, holding K fixed, labor would just go right to there, right? That is, if you could increase your labor, you say, well, I'm going to go value marginal product equal to the wage. I'm going to move from here to here. Everybody agrees with that? That would be the short run amount of labor. How would I figure out the long run response? Well, in the long run, I'm going to have to let K respond, right? K is going to want to move. And why is K going to move? This R hasn't changed. Why does K move? Well, which way? Well, think of it this way. Think about now that I've moved to L, which way is this equation moved? Really? Has to always go up? What would you be assuming about the cross-partial derivative? Let's assume, so let's do that case. FLK positive, right? That is, having more labor raises the marginal product capital. So now that I've increased labor, what happens over here? This curve would shift out, which would make me want to do what? Well, that would make me want to increase capital. Of course, when I increase capital, what's going to happen over here? This curve is going to shift out, which is going to make me want to have more labor, which, of course, is going to shift this curve out again, which is going to make me want to have more. It'll go back and forth. It'll keep going, but it's clear which way it's going, right? It's going out. I'm going to use more labor in the long run than I would have in the short run. So the demand for labor will be more elastic in the long run than in the short run. Okay? again, the same principle we talked about when we talked about output. How are you going to move capital? You're going to move capital in a way that allows you to, in this case, use more labor because labor got cheaper. Okay? What would happen if FLK was negative? What would happen in that case? This curve would shift in. So K would go down. So this curve would shift out. Why would it shift out? Because FLK is negative. Right? So this is going to shift out, which means L is going to go up. As L goes up, this curve is going to shift in, which is going to cause this curve to shift out again. Same story. Labor demand would also be more elastic. In this case, we'd be reducing capital to allow you to use more labor. Right? It's that same principle. You're just going to adjust that other input to allow you to do more of what you had the incentive to do in the first place. Okay? Now, you should go back and convince yourself that under what conditions will this converge? Okay? That is, if this is like the monkey way of solving the problem, right? This is what I always think about. Monkey can only think of one thing at a time. So he goes and he first moves L, and then he looks over here and he goes, man, K's out of balance. Let me move K. Oh, crap, L's out of balance. Let me move L. He keeps going back and forth. And actually, the monkey ultimately gets to the right answer. Okay? It just takes him a while. Okay? And the question is why? What condition do we need to make this process converge? You should do that. Because actually the condition you need, of course, is that these shifts get smaller and smaller, right? And the condition that these shifts get smaller to smaller is exactly what? Does anybody know? Well, it's not really, it's really part of the profit maximizing condition. Remember, when you have two inputs, if I want to maximize f of x and y, subject, not even subject to, I want to maximize a function of two variables. I know the first order conditions, of course, are always fx equals 0, fy equals 0. What are the second order conditions? fxx less than 0, fyy less than 0. I'm going to use strictly less than because I don't want to get into the higher order conditions. If I'm going to have it second order condition satisfied. But what else? I need fxx fyy minus fxy squared positive. The condition that these things converge is exactly that. That condition. That condition is exactly what you need to get these things to converge. That second order condition.
So basically, that doesn't mean that the maximum is well defined everywhere.
Exactly. That you have a true maximum here. You don't have a saddle point, right? You don't have something that's concave this way and concave that way, but kind of convex on some other dimension, right? And so that's really the condition. Yeah.
If there's not, then it can hit a corner. It can hit a corner.
Well, no, then it wouldn't have been a maximum to begin with, right? You need this in order to be maximizing. So locally, we need this to hold. Otherwise, we weren't at a maximum. So if we assume, which we should, that the firm was profit maximizing, we know this will hold. And at least locally, this will happen. Now, globally, we could have that happen. Because you think about it, what does this mean? It means that labor and capital don't kind of mix well. But it's okay if they don't mix well locally as long as they mix well globally, right? But if they ever got to the point where that local thing overwhelmed the other good aspects of mixing labor and capital together, then you'd go to a corner. You'd say, well, geez, these things, I get less when I put them together than they get when they put them in separately. Well, you're going to go to a corner. But this, remember, is only locally. They got to be they could be substitutes locally, but they can't kind of have this negative cross partial kind of measured globally. Otherwise, you'd rather just use them separately. You'd be better than mixing them together. Okay? That's kind of the problem. Okay? So you're right. If you had some global problem, you could get to a point where you say this just doesn't make any sense anymore. I'm just going to move way away from here. But locally, as long as it's a well-defined local maximum, this is going to hold, and then it'll be nice. You'll be able to, the monkey will get to the right point. Okay? All right. Any questions?